and the United Kingdom. They came from 27 different countries. And one of the things I noticed is that there weren't very many Asian startups that either applied or started made in. Now, historically, YC has made invested in several companies that have done very well from lots of different places. Anything from Japan, most recently, ClearTax from India, and then last year I actually found Dino at the Startup Battle Korea, run by Kotra, and encouraged them to sort of apply. And what I'm here is basically sort of figure out and understand sort of why we don't have enough companies applying from Korea, encourage you guys to apply, and talk about some of the stuff that we're looking for in the companies. Now, our companies have a collective sort of market cap valuation of $30 billion. And like every other sort of portfolio, we have a power law distribution in terms of return. So most of the value is concentrated in a few startups. I actually have 3 companies in our portfolios that's worth over $1 billion, and over 20 worth over $100 million. And of course, a lot of people are very interested in figuring out, like, how do you have a company? This is totally washed out. But that's a big pile of money, though. It's like, how do you get companies to become billion-dollar businesses? How do you sort of make that sort of happen? And what I tell people is, like, in the 3 months that we work with the startups, which is at the earliest stage of the company, right? We don't focus on this. This is a hard thing to sort of understand and sort of realize, right? The best way to get to $1 billion, in our opinion, is help them understand what's the best way to get that first dollar. What's the best way to get that first user? The reason I'm part of Y Combinator is because I went through the program myself. I was in the winter 2006 batch, the second ever batch in Y Combinator, the first one out here in Silicon Valley. And I found and built a product called Wufoo. It's an online form builder, helps create online forms and online surveys. And what's interesting about our software, even though it looked like it was easy enough to use by basically like children and kids, is that we were used by every industry, market, and vertical available. And by companies that you've probably heard of. Now, we ran that company for 5 years, and we were acquired by SurveyMonkey in 2011. And what was interesting about that acquisition, and I think some of the program notes might sort of ruin this, is that we had a lot of interesting numbers surrounding it, right? We only were 10 people at the time, with over 500,000 users that we were supporting. This is a graph that was put together by TechCrunch near then. On the bottom sort of horizontal axis, it shows the amount of funding that was raised by these different companies. And on the y-axis there, it shows the valuation of the companies at acquisition or IPO. Each dot represents a company. And we're this outlier way off to the left. It's illustrated. The average startup on that main line raises about $25 million. Their return to their investors, on average, is 676%. And Wufoo, we only raised $118,000 on purpose for the life of the company, and our returns to our investors were over 29,000%. So part of my expertise is, if you're interested in starting a company outside of Silicon Valley, because we operate our company on the East Coast, even though we raised this money in Silicon Valley, if you're interested in return on investment, if you're interested in running lean or basically bootstrapping, right, I'd love to talk to you. Now, like I said, focusing on the fundamentals and sort of core values is some of the most important things that YC taught us in our company. And for us, it was about figuring out, like, what's the relationship we wanted to have with the user. We didn't want to build software that looked like everything else. We wanted software that people loved. And so we were fanatical about this one idea. How do we create really strong relationships with our users? And what we've discovered over time, after reading a lot of different research, is that human beings are relationship manufacturing creatures. We can't help but create relationships with the things we interact with over and over and over again. Whether it's the cars we drive, the clothes we wear, or the software that we use, we anthropomorphize them, assign personality characteristics to them, and then we can't help but say, like, this is the relationship that we want to have, and we expect certain expectations from it. So, our philosophy was basically to treat our users and our customers as if we were creating a real relationship with, like, a person. We approached our new users as if we were trying to date them, and our existing users as if it was a successful marriage. And then we kind of looked at sort of, what was the research, what are the best practices for doing this, so we can inject it into our product and into our company values. When it comes to dating, right, one of the most important things that a lot of people sort of understand intuitively, but research sort of backs up, is first impressions. I'll give you a good example. If you're on a first date with somebody, and it's going really well, but all of a sudden in the middle of a dinner, you catch them picking their nose. That date is probably going to be over. You're not going to have another one afterwards, right? But if you're married to someone for like 30 years, right, and you catch your husband like digging for gold, right, on the Barker Lounger, you don't immediately call your lawyer and file for a divorce, right? Kind of shrug your shoulders, it's like, it's got a heart of gold at least, right? There's something different about the first time you interact with someone, the first time you interact with things that has a different level of expectation. Now, first impressions for a product or service, right, are pretty standard, and these are the things that people focus on a lot, right? But my argument, and what I think a lot of software does not do, is realize there's so many other first moments. Things like the very first email you ever send to someone. Everyone likes to dial that home, right? Don't pay a lot of attention to sort of the copy. What does it look like when they first create something in the interface, even though they don't have anything there? What does the login link do? The very first ad they ever see, the very first time they have customer support. All these are first impressions, and all of them help create the word of mouth story. Because when we talk about relationships between one another, if I ask you, hey, tell me about whatever, we usually ask for the origin story. So how did you two meet? How did you propose, right? And those are the stories we tell over and over and over again. And it's the same thing for products and services. So I'll give you a couple of examples of this. So this is the Wufoo login link up in the upper right-hand corner. You'll see a little dinosaur there, which is not needed for the spec, but if you hover over it, there's a little tip that goes "rawr" on it. Right? And it's something that just says, like right from the very beginning, you're starting your journey on this software, it's going to be a little bit different. This is the login page for Vimeo. It's actually an older version on there, but it's absolutely beautiful. This is the mobile version of that login. And a lot of people just like sort of take these little interfaces for granted. Sometimes you don't have to do it just with visual design. This is Cork. This is a social network for wine enthusiasts. I don't think it's around anymore, but I'm going to read this copy to you because I can't read it. First name, what your mom calls you. Last name, what your army buddies call you. Password, something you remember but hard to guess. Password confirmation, type it again. Think of it as a text. It's literally a poem as you go through the form and sort of fill it out. And I'll let you know, here, right here at registration, you're about to experience something different. Now this is the Yahoo login form. And so what does it say about the personality of what this software is going to be like? Right? What does it say about them? About this sort of starting point journey? And I think it's a shame because the companies that they acquire have to be forced to go through this. Flickr, which I think has some of the best sort of personality in terms of copy on the web still, their login form before they got acquired by Yahoo was get in there. Sometimes the places where people are going to make mistakes, that's a first impression. So this is Hale. This is a site that helps you test HTTP requests. And if you hit something that's a 404, this is what you see. Right? Makes you smile and realize like, oh, okay, that was delightful. And now that sort of emotional reaction is now tied to that sort of app. Go back here. So there's a talk that was done by Kathy Sierra a long time ago. She's a writer of a blog called Creating Passionate Users and one called Serious Pony now. And she talks about this idea of like, why do we spend all this sort of money and attention to the marketing materials, right? But when it's time for people to get like the documentation and the manual, we give them something super bland. The thing that they actually need to sort of use and become experts at the product. One company that gets this right is MailChimp. They redesigned their help documentation so all the guides look like magazines. And as a result, readership and understanding of their software went up, and the amount of support that was coming through the system went down. Sometimes conscientiousness, right, can go in terms of something very subtle and actionable. So this is Stripe's documentation. And one of the things, if you're a developer, that you have to do all the time, that's a pain, is that when you're looking through the examples of the documentation, right, you have to go in and copy your API credentials and then put them in the right places in the example. What Stripe does is inside of the documentation, if you're logged into the app, they automatically put your credentials in there for you. So you don't have to do copy and paste twice to get started with their software. You read the documentation and get started right away. And it makes all the difference in terms of letting developers know, like, this is the software or this is the platform for them. When we were working on our API, we knew we wanted to launch it out to the people and have a different sort of marketing approach. Because the typical way that a lot of people launch APIs is to like do some kind of giveaway and try to like bribe people into like building apps on top of the platform. So we were trying to think of what's a way that we sort of inject our personality and have this be a special type of first moment for this sort of push. So in our company, one of our sort of core values is that the founders are big medieval nuts, and we take our company to medieval times every single year. And so what we would do is we said, this has to be somehow tied to that. And so we contacted the guys over at armor.com, and we said, can you forge us a custom battle axe? And then our API contest said, hey, if you win our API contest, you win a medieval weapon. And the results are, that first impression, that origin story of how they interacted with our API went fairly viral. And as a result, we got over 25 different applications built on it. The quality and the quantity of which we could not have paid for based on the budget that we had for something like this. We had things like an iPhone app and an Android app and a WordPress plugin. High quality things, and all because we said we wanted to make sure that first impression was something a little different that people were going to remember. I can go on and on with tons of different examples, but I'll point you to a blog that I super love. It's called Little Big Details, and it's just screenshots and sort of highlights of things that software does in lots of different apps that are special and that show people like, oh, the people behind us cared a little bit, right, and made all the difference. Now, when it comes to long-term relationships, customers that you want to keep on and prevent them from churning, we modeled sort of our company values around marriages. And the person that you talk to about marriages is John Gottman. He's a researcher up in Seattle, and he's been featured on things like This American Life and Malcolm Gladwell's books. And he has an interesting parlor trick that he can do. You can watch a videotape of a married couple fighting for 15 minutes and predict with 85% accuracy whether they're going to divorce or not 4 years from now. Now, if he increases that video to an hour and asks them to also talk about their hopes and their dreams, his prediction rating goes up to 94%. They show these same videotapes to marriage counselors, sociologists, psychologists, successfully married couples, and those people cannot predict better than random chance. So John Gottman understands something fundamental about how we fight and how we deal with conflict with one another that determines longevity. And the thing that he found out that was surprising is that it's not that successfully married people don't fight at all. We all fight, and we all fight about the exact same things. Money, kids, sex, time, and other. And others are things like jealousy and the in-laws. The thing is, the places where we fight with our customers, that's customer support. And that's the places where churn starts to happen, or divorce. And so you can actually map all the things that people fight about to all of these characteristics that John Gottman discovered, right? Oh, your software like sort of costs too much. Anything that you're building software that deals with someone else's clients, people are extremely sensitive about. Performance, how long you're up and how fast. Roadmap, what are the things you're working on in your software? And I said jealousy and in-laws for the others, right? So that's competition and partnerships. Anything weird happening there, you're going to have a conflict about it, and it's potential opportunities for churn. What I love about this is that everyone in this room is working on how do you optimize your conversion funnels. And customer support, the places where we fight with our users, they're the things that happen in between these steps, right? I didn't get the email to sign up for the service. I don't know how to log in. I forgot my password. I don't know how to use this software, so I can't be active. You know what? I think this costs too much, or I'm having problems with the billing system. I don't need to use this software anymore. When those things happen, how we deal with them will determine the only two things that sort of matter in terms of growth for your startup, right? Conversion rate and churn, right? And this is sometimes the most neglected, I think. So how did we deal with fighting in our company? Well, we had this one other insight, and that was the people that are building the software, they're disconnected from the people who have to use the software, more often than not. And the reason this happens is basically out of the origin of how most startups happen. Technical co-founders especially love the period before they launch. To the point where they'll delay launch because they love crafting something from nothing. It's the act of pure creation that's sort of pretty blissful because they can do no sort of wrong. And then as soon as they launch out to people, all of reality starts to set in, and all these other things they have to start to deal with. And the interesting part is, this is where it's extremely crucial for companies to deal with this stuff properly. Technical co-founders want to go back to that time period where all I did was create stuff, right? And what they do is they silo out the company, and they have other people deal with all these other aspects of it. And what ends up happening is people are disconnected, right? And what you get is a lot of dispassionate people, or a lot of disconnected people who are building stuff that doesn't necessarily stuff that people want. So for us, we figured out at Wufoo is like we need to inject these three qualities: responsibility, accountability, and humility into the software development process, right? Because that's what you sort of need in order to get people to sort of understand and be empathetic to sort of the user's needs. So the way we did this is we created our own acronym for dealing with quality development. It's no different from any other agile practices like test-driven development or what have you. And we call it support-driven development. And what you do is really simple. You don't need a Gantt chart. You don't need daily stand-ups. All you got to do is just make every person in the company do customer support. And once you do this one simple sort of act, you have something really incredible. The creators become the supporters, right? And you fix the feedback loop with your customers and your users. So there's lots of different advantages that you get out of this. The most important being that the people who create the software are actually in the best position to give the best quality customer support, right? If you have the right people with the right attitude. So Paul English of Kayak.com, we're not the first ones to come across this idea. He actually would install a telephone hotline for phone support right in the middle of the engineering floor. And basically just ring with customer support calls. And people would say to Paul, hey, why would you spend $150,000, $200,000 on an engineer to answer phone support when you can pay a fraction of that overseas or by someone else? And he would tell people, like, look, you know what? After the second or third time that phone rings with the same problem, the engineers stop doing whatever that they were doing beforehand, right? And then they fix that problem so they don't get that phone call anymore. That's how things get better in our company, right? By putting the right sort of feedback loops in place. So at Wufoo, here's just sort of what customer support looked like. We had over 500,000 users when we sold in 2011. 5 million people interacted with the Wufoo form or report, whether they knew it or not. And every one of those people we supported with our 10-person team. We got about, on average, 400 issues a week. That's about 800 emails from us. The average response time from a Wufoo customer support person, which is every person in our company, was 7 to 12 minutes from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. From 9 p.m. to midnight is 1 hour, and on the weekends it would go no longer than 24 hours with a response from someone that intimately worked on and built the product. The best way to help scale support and deal with fighting in a relationship is to help people help themselves, right? So we spent lots of things as a result of these priorities on things like frequently asked questions, lots of tool tips, right? Doing things like, oh, here's the help button in the app. Let's make sure the link to it goes to the right section depending on where they're at in the application, not just to the table of contents. And then we redesigned our documentation over and over and over again. A lot of people like to do it once and sort of stop. But support became a key KPI for us in our company. And as a result, one of our iterations of our design reduced our customer support by 30% overnight. And the key, I'm going to tell you, is frequently asked questions, easy navigation, a table of contents, and lots of screencasts. It's things that people don't think they need to do as part of the product development process, but made all the difference in terms of how we scaled and how we grew by word of mouth. Now, one of the things I love about a support-driven development company is that your engineers start doing experiments around customer support. So here's one that we did. Kathy Sierra, who I mentioned earlier, also talked about this idea that we're disconnected in terms of empathy, right? The tone of our documentation and our support online is disconnected from people's emotions when they're having problems. So I'll give you an example. If you're upset about something, right, you have a scowl on your face, you have angry sort of body movement, and you go to the target counter wanting to return something, the person acts appropriately to all those nonverbal communication cues, right? Online, we don't have that, so all documentation just looks super chipper and happy, and it basically makes all these assumptions that you are also another genius developer. So she says, unless we have face recognition, we're never going to solve this problem on the web. Well, we are not face recognition experts at Wufoo, but we do have a little knowledge about forms. So we said, maybe we could just ask people what they feel. So we added a drop-down, little form, and we said, okay, just tell us your emotional state. Right? Just tell us how you feel. And our hypothesis was, nobody would fill that shit out. Right? We just wanted to see what would happen, because we're like, Kat and Sierra, we think you're wrong. But we'll see sort of what happens as a result. And the results were, the emotional state drop-down field was filled out 75.8% of the time. What's even more surprising is, if you put it in context, the browser type drop-down field, which I would argue you need a little bit more, right, in order to figure out what your technical problem is, was only filled out 78.1% of the time. Users were basically telling us, hey, how I feel about this problem, my emotional state, is just as important to me in terms of what information I think you need to know as what my technical sort of specs are. The other thing that I loved about this is that we had this interesting side effect that happened over the coming months afterwards. Excuse me. So, human beings have, when they only are able to respond to people in written communication, because we only had email support, a limited number of ways of expressing very strong emotions. So when you're upset about stuff, you're going to either use all caps, lots of exclamation marks, or curse words. And what we noticed is like, God, everyone's being a lot nicer in the customer support stuff when they're not talking to us. What's going on? And sure enough, after we implemented the emotional state drop-down field, all three of those metrics went down on average. When people have an outlet for their emotions, they can be more rational and logical, and it makes doing support a lot more sane for the people who have to deal with it. Some more sort of numbers and updates about sort of the breakdown and stuff. We serve people as they came, so there was no sort of like messing around with results or trying to game the system as a result. The other thing that I love about support-driven development is that your products are actually a whole lot better as a result of it, right? The people that experience doing support regularly and directly, they're better at their jobs. And there's actually research that supports this. Jared Spool of User Interface Engineering, one of the premier usability firms in the world, he's worked with clients like Amazon, and Facebook, and et cetera, right? He says user experience teams get worse over time if they don't have direct exposure to users and customers. And it has to be in a very specific way. It has to be direct exposure. It can't be like over email. It can't be just like someone creates a user profile or someone creates like charts and graphs and stuff. You have to talk to customers one-on-one directly. It has to be a minimum every 6 weeks. Any longer than that, the software that they build gets worse and worse over time, right? And it has to be at least for 2 hours. Every person at my company was doing customer support on average 4 to 8 hours every single week. And the difference is, Wufoo was actually rated one of the top applications UIs of 2008. This is when we were just a 3-person company still, right? We beat out teams with $1 million usability budgets. And this is sort of a list that was put out by Jacob Nielsen, another guru of usability.